In this video for Computer Science 9618, we're going to take a look at a paper 4 question and walk through how the question works, how to answer it, and how to get full points on this paper 4 question. It focuses on a circular queue. Now this one is from paper 4 variant 1, taken this past year, a few months ago in May-June 2025 exam. So let's go ahead and take a look at this circular queue question. A program stores positive integers in a circular queue. The queue is stored as a global 1D array of 20 integers with the identifier q. Each index is initialized with the data -1. So we can simply do that with a for loop. The global variable head pointer initialized at -1 points to the first element. Tail pointer initialized at -1 points to the last element, and the number of items initialized to 0 stores the number of items in the queue. Now it does tell us in the very beginning that it will store a maximum of 20 integers. So we got to make sure we pay attention to that, because if the number of items is equal to 20, then we know there's no room in the queue. When we dequeue an item, meaning we remove an item from the queue, we need to make sure we decrement the number of items as well. Now the first thing you want to do is notice these are global variables, and this question is worth 2 points. You're going to get 1 point for making them global and then another point for initializing them. So if you skip over the global variable and you make them local, you're going to run into lots of problems with your program, as well as leaving a free point on the exam. So write program code to declare an initialized queue, head pointer, tail pointer, and number of items. So we'll do that in just a minute. Then we're going to write the function Enqueue. When it's a function, that means we're going to return a value. So we want to make sure we write a function, not a procedure, which is a sub. So it takes an integer as a parameter, checks if the queue is full. How do we do that? We check to see if the number of items is equal to 20. Returns false if the queue is full, stores the parameter in the next position in the queue, and returns true if the queue is not full. And then updates the appropriate pointers and number of items. Write program code for Enqueue. Let's swing over to VB and let's pick up these 8 points on our paper 4 exam. Let's go ahead and let's start with those global variables. The first one is going to be a queue. It's a 1D array, and it's going to hold 20 indices, and that's going to be an integer. Now, because it holds 20 numbers, you have 2 options here. You can do 20 or you can do 19. Now, I'm going to do 20. That way, I can simply check and make sure that the number of items is equal to 20, the same with the index. So that's why I'm doing 20, but if you want to do 19, you can do that as well. The next thing we need is that head pointer, and we have to use the same variable names they give us. So they spelled pointer all the way out, so we're going to do the same thing, and then number of items, and that's going to be an integer as well. With that being done, all we need to do now is initialize each index in the queue to -1. So I'm going to do for I equals 1 to 20. I'm omitting index 0. If you're going to include index 0, your loop will go 0 to 19, and all I need to do is qi equals -1, and then I have initialized each index of the queue. The next thing I need to do is initialize that head pointer, and the head pointer is equal to -1, the tail pointer is equal to -1, and the number of items, that's going to be equal to 0. So that will deal with the first part of the question. The next thing we need to do is write the function Enqueue. All right, we're going to write the function Enqueue. Now it says that it takes a integer as a parameter, so I'm going to do by val item as integer, and this returns a Boolean value. It's going to return true if it was added successfully, false if it was not added successfully. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find out, is there any room in my queue? Well, if my number of items is equal to 20, then there's no room in my queue, and I'm simply going to return false. Now, if there is room in the queue, the first thing I need to ask myself is, okay, are we at the first item? So if my number of items is equal to 0, then that means I'm adding my very first item, and it's just number of items. There we go. And then my tail pointer is going to be equal to 1. My head pointer is going to be equal to 1. And then we'll increment number of items at the end. And then inside my queue, at the tail pointer, that's where I'm going to stick that item. So the reason tail pointer and head pointer are both equal to 1 is it's the very first item I'm adding. I'm emitting index 0. And because I'm emitting an index 0, I have one item, which is both my start item, which is my head pointer, and my last item, which is my tail pointer. Now, if it's not the first item I'm adding, then I need to increment tail pointer by 1. And the reason I want to do that, if I do not increment my tail pointer, and I've already added the first item, and I'm adding item 2, 3, or whatever it may be, I don't want to overwrite the previous item. If I don't update or increment my tail pointer, it's going to overwrite the previous item that was there. Once I increment my tail pointer, I need to check, are we at or past the bounds of the array? Because remember, it's a circular queue. So if my tail pointer is equal to 21, that means I'm outside the bounds of the array, and I got to reset my tail pointer back to 1, back to that very first index. If it's not, then that's fine. Doesn't matter. We're still going to add that item. If it is equal to 21, we're setting it back to 1. But either way, we're going to add that item to our tail pointer. And that's if the items is not equal to 20. Once we do that, we just have to do number of items plus equals 1. Because if this code runs, we're going to add an item. If this code runs and we return false, it's not going to check the rest of these. And after we increment number of items, we simply return true. And just like that, we have our Enqueue code that we need. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next part of the question. Moving on to the next part, the main program attempts to store each of the integers 1 to 25 inclusive in the queue in ascending numerical order using Enqueue. Very easy. We're going to use the for loop to do most of the work for us. The next part outputs the integer that was passed to Enqueue and successful if it was stored in the queue, or unsuccessful if it was not stored in the queue. If the integer 5 is passed to Enqueue and is stored in the queue, which it should be if we're doing it in numerical order 1 to 25, 5 will go into index 5, and that will be our fifth item. It says the output will be 5 successful. If the integer 23 is passed to Enqueue and is not stored in the queue, which it shouldn't be, because we'll have 20 items before we reach the value of 23, the output will be 23 unsuccessful. Write program code for the main program, which is submain or our main method. Let's swing over to VB.net and let's pick up this easy 3 points on our paper 4 exam. Now, because we're going to call Enqueue, we need to store what is going to be returned. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call mine success, and that's going to be a Boolean value. And all I'm going to do is for I equals 1 to 25. If you're worried about this part, don't be. You've done for loops. You did them in pre-ACE, you did them in AS, and you did it in A-level. Nothing that you haven't done before, nothing you can't handle. So all we're going to do is we're going to call Enqueue. And what are we passing down? We're just going to pass down I. 1, 2, 3, all the way 1 to 25, just like they asked us to do. And then we're going to check to see if success is equal to true. If it is, then all we're going to do is we're going to output that the item was added successfully. So we're going to output I, so like 1 or whatever it may be, and successful, just like they did. And then if it's not true, then obviously it's false. And we're going to say it was unsuccessful. And just like that, we have picked up 3 points on our paper 4 exam. Cambridge doesn't know who they're messing with. You're ready and you're able to do this. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this question and show Cambridge who's boss. The function Dequeue returns -1 if the queue is empty. So if our number of items is equal to 0, we're simply going to return -1. If the queue is not empty, the function returns the next item in the queue, updates the appropriate pointers, and updates number of items. Write program code for Dequeue, so we're going to write that function. Write program code to extend the main program to call Dequeue twice, and output the return value each times. So that should return number 1 and number 2 because those are the first items inside of our queue with the for loop that we just wrote. Then we're going to test our program. So we should see 1 to 20 added successfully. 21 through 25 should be unsuccessful. And then we should see item 1 or the number 1 and number 2 because we're going to call Dequeue twice. Let's go ahead. Let's swing over to vb.net. Let's write this code, test our program, and wrap up this video. So we're going to write that function, Dequeue. Doesn't take any parameters, but it does return an integer because we're pulling an item from the queue. So item as integer. There we go. The first thing I need to do, is there anything even in the queue? Because that's what it wants us to check. So if number of items is equal to 0, then I don't have anything there. And we're going to return -1. That's what it told us to do. Now, if I'm not returning -1, then I need to go ahead and load up item. And I do that based on the head pointer. Remember, queues work on the first in, first out principle. Our tail pointer allows us to store the next item in the queue wherever we're at currently, just like a line at a theme park. Our head pointer allows us to retrieve the first item in the queue because it's on the first in, first out principle. So we're going to pull item 1 or number 1, then we're going to pull number 2 because number 2 will be the next item in the queue, which means to get to that next item, I need to update my head pointer and increment it by 1. Now remember, because this is a circular array, if I'm at the end, I need to swing back around to the beginning. So if my head pointer is equal to 21, then I'm going to set my head pointer back to 1 because that's going to be the first index that we are using. Now, the next thing we need to do is decrement our number of items. So our number of items minus equals 1, that will decrement it by 1. And now I need to reset the pointers that we had at the very beginning, just like we had. And this part could be a little tricky to get. If our number of items is equal to 0, then our head pointer is going to be equal to -1. Our tail pointer is going to be equal to -1. We're resetting those pointers. Now, once we've done all that, all we need to do is return that item that we have. Just like that, we've done Dequeue. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our main program. We're going to call Dequeue twice. So we're going to do that right after this for loop. We definitely don't want to do it each time. And we're just going to call it twice. So there we go. So if our code works successfully, we should see 1 to 20 being successful, 21 through 25 unsuccessful. And because number 1 was added first, when we call Dequeue this time, it should output 1. Then when we do Dequeue, it should output 2. And actually what we need to do is we need to output it. So we need to do console.writeLine Dequeue. Otherwise, it's just going to return it and we're not going to see anything. So we'll just console.writeLine. I mean, I guess if you want to do a variable, you could do that. That's just more coding. And you only have 2.5 hours to do your paper 4 exam. Sounds like it's a long time, but it's going to be a fast 2.5 hours. All right, let's run our code here. We can see 1 through 20 is successful, exactly what we're looking for. 21 to 25 is unsuccessful, exactly what we're looking for. And we see 1 is the first item pulled out of the queue. 2 is the second item pulled out of the queue. Hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please take a moment to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to help the channel grow. And we'll see you guys in the next programming video.